Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. United States President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin has met in Anchorage, Alaska in a closely watched summit. Trump has said his aim is to bring Putin to the table for talks, not to negotiate an immediate Ukraine peace deal. Donald Trump has suggested that the US may not proceed with secondary tariffs on India over Russian oil, an action which he had earlier stated could have significantly impacted India. The Ministry of External Affairs has also released a statement now on the Trump-Putin summit held in Alaska on the 15th of August. The MEA has welcomed the summit meeting between the two leaders, saying their leadership in the pursuit of peace is commendable. The ministry further added that India appreciates the progress made in the summit, asserting that the only way forward is through dialogue and diplomacy. The ministry affirmed that the world wants to see an early end to the conflict in Ukraine. Joining us live at this point is Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India. Ambassador Sibal, thank you very much for being with us today on NewsX. Let me begin by asking you about this Trump-Putin summit. The world had their eye on this summit, of course. It has ended, though, in Alaska without any peace deal. What do you make of what has transpired and also the joint press briefing that followed the meeting?
That this meeting was not going to produce a peace agreement, because the peace agreement would depend on satisfying the conditions that Russia has outlined for a durable peace agreement. In fact, President Putin, in his joint press conference with Trump at Alaska, pinpointed once again that for a long-term durable peace, it was necessary to look at the causes of the conflict, and talked about Russian security. And these are points that he's been making all along, right from the beginning. Now, there was a feeling at one time that this meeting will be used to announce some kind of a ceasefire. Now, Zelensky has been pressing for this, the Europeans have been pressing for this, and Trump also thought that if he succeeded in having a ceasefire, it will be a big feather in his cap, and this will be the first step towards then discussing the core issues, which, as I said, was a sequence that was not acceptable to the Russian president. Now, just before the summit, he walked back on this and said that it'll be a meeting where he'll want to have face-to-face encounter with the Russian president, size him up, see how the whole thing goes. And if it goes well, then he would hope for a second meeting very soon thereafter. In other words, he was not expecting major concrete results from this encounter, this meeting. Now, what has happened is that on some broad issues, there seems to be some understanding, but on some, as Trump said, significant issues, which obviously means ceasefire and security guarantees, there hasn't been yet an understanding which will be reached subsequently. Now, the agenda for this meeting was not limited only to the Ukraine conflict. Let's be clear about this. There are wider issues, and this was mentioned by by Putin also in his remarks at the joint press conference, which relate to the New START treaty. Trump himself also spoke about the huge size of Russia and the huge resources it has, and this and that, clearly indicating that Biden and others made a big mistake in creating such divisions between the two countries that the US lost the opportunity to actually benefit from huge Russian resources. Obviously, he has an eye on that. So there are these bilateral issues between the United States and Russia, which were discussed, and which, according to Trump, it was very necessary that a dialogue and an engagement should be reinstated with a huge country like Russia. Now, of course, Ukraine is very much in the news.
Yes.
In some senses is center to the efforts that are being made. But on this, I think it will be for another day. Now, what you said about tariffs and this and that, in his press interview, he said that since the talks are proceeding and went off well. He doesn't see immediately any need to impose the tariffs, but he may do so in through
Absolutely. But
2 weeks time,
because
3 weeks
India
time.
also is looking at this meeting very closely, Ambassador Sibbal, because one wonders if a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine will finally put an end to those additional 25% tariffs imposed on India.
I think we should not link the peace deal with the question of tariffs, because the tariffs were linked to our buying oil from Russia. Now, if you notice, Putin in his press briefing said that U.S. trade with Russia has gone up by 20%. And we have also officially pointed out what U.S. is buying from Russia. So it's not as if Russia itself is not, U.S. itself is not trading with Russia. So the issue is one of oil, not a larger peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, which may take several weeks. But I have a feeling that now that he is engaged in a dialogue with Russia, there's progress on that account, and they have a wider agenda which will necessitate continuing dialogue. And the fact that he's very hesitant to impose tariffs on China, he's bought another 90 days of time before he does that. It's unlikely that he will follow up on his threat to impose 25% tariff penalties on India. This is what I think. This is what is logical. But let's see ultimately what happens. I think the fact, if he did that without doing anything on China, and the fact that he himself is talking to Russia, would look extremely anomalous, extremely anomalous.
Okay. Let me, in fact, quickly also ask you, though, about these secondary sanctions, that the U.S. has imposed. Many are asking why, Ambassador Sibbal, the U.S. has chosen to target India with these tariffs over its Russian oil imports, while not taking similar measures against others like China. China imports a significant amount of Russian oil as well.
Yes, but not only China. The EU imports huge amounts of LNG and oil, as well as refined petroleum products from Russia. In fact, I was reading statistics, and I put them on X myself, that after 2022, when the Ukraine conflict began, Europe has bought $214 billion worth of gas and oil from Russia, and of oil from Russia. And in fact, their year-to-year imports of gas since 2022 has actually gone up. Has gone up. Turkey is the biggest buyer of Russian refined products. Japan gets LNG from Russia from Sakhalin-2, in which they had invested. So why are these countries not being targeted? The fact is that India is a soft target relatively. China has the capacity to retaliate, as they have done with these rare earth magnets and some other technologies they have, which the Americans need desperately for actually their military production, etc., etc. And if there's a breakdown of a dialogue between United States and China, the consequences of that will be very major. So Trump doesn't want to risk that. But India, as I said, in his view, is a soft target. And then he's miffed with India because we didn't give him credit for the ceasefire. He's made it somewhat personal. And he's needling us also on the Pakistan question. So there's a mixture of motives why he's doing it with Amin.
Yeah. Okay. Do you, though, see that trade deal happening in the near future between India and the United States?
My understanding is that whatever had been discussed in these 5 rounds of negotiations was considered acceptable by the USTR. And this was put up to Trump for his approval. But in the meantime, Trump has succeeded in squeezing the maximum out of Japan and the EU in very one-sided deal. And at that time, I had actually said that his tail is up and it's going to be difficult for India. And the USTR actually has gone on record to say that Trump's reaction was, when he saw the interim deal, no, everything should be opened up, or almost everything should be opened up. So he thought that he can squeeze India into making concessions for the lobbies that are pressing him, the agricultural lobbies and the dairy lobbies, and what have you. Uh, so, uh, and now I think there is no room left for any further major concession by India for the interim deal, even if there's a sixth round, some tweaking here and there, but that won't satisfy Trump. Now, whether we can now move on to the multi-sector trade agreement that we had in view and enlarge the scope of discussions and see whether by autumn we can have a major deal, that's all up in the air. My own feeling is that it's going to be very difficult, and I don't foresee Trump coming in autumn, and therefore
Yes.
I don't foresee the Quad summit taking place.
Okay. And as far as the peace deal now, how do you believe the efforts in the last 24 hours have moved us closer to a peace deal? How closer are we to a peace deal in the
I,
near future between Russia
I,
and Ukraine, or do you believe it's been most optics?
I don't think, because Europe is absolutely determined to put a spanner in the works. If you see the statement that has been issued by the European leaders, by the European Commission, it's extremely negative, extremely negative. They're still talking about more sanctions on Russia, more arms aid to Ukraine. Ukraine must negotiate from a position of strength, that Russia should not be allowed to get away with this aggression, and that Russia has no right to have any veto on future Ukrainian choices, including membership of NATO.
Yes.
So, and then Zelensky himself has been extremely negative that he's not going to accept any territorial concessions, because if he did, his presidency is over.
Okay.
So he can't take the risk.
Okay.
So there are a lot of hurdles down the road. Now, what may happen is that Trump may then say, "Look, I've done my best. Now it's up to you to
Right.
manage," and walks away. And if that happens, then of course Ukraine collapses. But I don't know. I don't think we're going to get a peace deal in a hurry.
Okay, point taken. Let's leave it at that. Ambassador Sibal, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on this big story. Let me also join Professor Madhav Nalapath, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. And at this point, Professor Nalapath, India has welcomed the progress made at the summit. We've said the world is waiting to see an early end to the conflict in Ukraine. What do you make of the MEA reaction to this Trump-Putin summit and the progress made in the last 24 hours?
Look, the MEA has welcomed the summit. And I think the MEA is right to welcome the summit, because the fact of the matter is, finally, you are seeing some glimmer of hope in the prospect for peace, and not in years anymore, but not even in months, but in weeks, maybe a month or so, but you can count that in weeks. So quite frankly, I think the MEA is quite right in welcoming this particular meeting between President Trump and President Putin. And I think President Trump can be very happy with the fact that President Putin and he have had this kind of a conversation. And if at the end of 5 or 6 weeks, he does manage to get a peaceful resolution in Ukraine, that will save further bloodshed on the Ukrainian side and the Russian side, not to forget the collateral damage being done to the entire global south. So I would like to say that, in my view, I'm glad the Alaska summit took place. I'm glad that it went on in this way. I'm certain there are many issues that President Trump and President Putin discussed. And as far as India is concerned, look, it will be very odd for India to be sanctioned for buying Russian oil, when the reality is, first of all, India is a part of the Quad. India signed all the foundation defense agreements. And very importantly, that will not be a very good signal to Russia from the United States. So I feel that there is a very good chance that all this threat, this tariff threat, etc., that he will not carry carry it out for simple reason that it involves Russian energy, and has correctly been brought out by Ambassador Sybil. Russian energy is bought huge quantities by Europe and even by the United States. So, frankly, I'm happy about the summit taking place. I'm happy about the results. And I think both President Trump and President Putin have a right to be happy. Those who are supporting Ukraine under Zelensky in its futile effort to get back the land that Ukraine lost in 2014, it's a futile quest. It is futile from the very beginning. And all that has happened is more suffering, more loss of land on the Ukrainian side. So I do believe that there is a good chance that there will be peace. And I think that will also need to entail peaceful and fair elections in Ukraine. And I'm very certain about one thing. I don't think Zelensky is going to get anywhere near a landslide that he got last time on the plank of peace. In fact, I believe that a genuine peace candidate, will challenge and defeat
Yes.
Zelensky, which
Okay.
is why he's been so reluctant to have
Okay.
elections so far.
Once again, Dr. Shad Kohli, senior economist, if I can rope you in here on the Indian viewpoint to this meeting. The MEA has, of course, welcomed it, but more importantly, how much was riding on our tariffs and on other aspects for India to this meeting between Putin and Trump? How do you react to the progress made? And is the absence of any clear deal just yet going to also impact those additional tariffs on us?
Well, good evening, Uday. Good evening to the panelists and the NewsX viewers. I see two viewpoints emerging here. One viewpoint, of course, is that since President Trump has spoken to President Putin, so he will give respect to the fact that we are under a dialogue, although nothing came out of it, but at least we are under a dialogue. So any action taken against a country which is buying oil, I think will probably go against the dialogue. That's one viewpoint. And the second viewpoint is that probably he may completely disregard, because he said the last word that he left with President Putin: I'll speak to NATO, I'll speak to Zelensky, I'm going to have a phone call with them, because obviously Ukraine doesn't want to give up any territory. So that may not be acceptable to Russia. But then at least till the time the dialogue is on, Uday, I have a strong feeling that he may like to hold back at least the additional 25% tariffs which he's put on India because of our buying Russian oil. So that is what I feel. But as far as the mathematics go, I think 50% tariffs, if they really come into on the ground from 27th of August, that would basically mean no export to America to that extent, at least out of the $86 billion that we do. At least $50 billion of that amount will have to be stopped, because we will not remain competitive. And I can vouch for that, because I've been in touch with some exporters in Gujarat and in South India. I've spoken to them. Some of them have margins of around 10 to 15%. And so do the importers in America. So even if both sacrifice their margin and trade at low profit, no loss, even then, it will be a loss-making proposition. The consumers in America will not be accepting at the price where the American importers will be getting from Bangladesh, Vietnam, and some of the other places for that matter. In fact, China even for that matter, because China's tariffs have been postponed by 3 months. So therefore, considering that this is going to be a catch-22 situation from 27th August, I have a feeling, and also knowing President Trump, that he's known for flip-flops. He's known to take back and make U-turns and give second thoughts, third thoughts, and go back on his decisions. So I have a feeling that he might like to reconsider at least the additional 25%, till as long as he keeps President Putin in mind. Because after all, they are about Russian oil. And he's been shown the mirror as well, that we should not forget that America has been shown the mirror by India as well, that America itself was importing about $3 billion worth of goods from Russia. And the NATO allies, as was rightly mentioned by my preceding panelists, that NATO allies have been themselves buying heavy amounts of energy from Russia. So, you've got to look everybody with the same prism. I mean, you cannot have differentiating. Of course, if that ceasefire of operations is this point that why India is not acknowledging that he stopped the war. Well, he said that more than 30 times, and not acknowledged once. India has refuted the claim. So that might be counting on his mind, which is why, India is being differentiated vis-a-vis China as far as Russian oil is concerned. So I feel Russian oil is just an excuse there is other agenda, political agenda, which is, or geopolitical agenda, which is on his mind. He wants to take out that vengeance against India, is what I feel. But as of now, the Indian exporters, I can tell you, they are in a very precarious situation. I know for sure there are thousands of crores of stock lying in their inventory, which the importers are either quickly importing before the 50% comes into effect, where 25% has already taken the effect. So they are busy exporting, and then there's a lot in the pipeline as well. Thousands and thousands of workers in these factories have their jobs at stake.
Absolutely.
So as of now, there's absolute uncertainty as far as
Okay,
the
so that
export market is
uncertainty has not ended despite this meeting, is what you're saying. Pathikrit Pain is also joining us on the broadcast now. Pathikrit, what do you make of the progress made in the last 24 hours towards peace for Ukraine, and how should India be viewing this meeting, given the secondary sanctions imposed on us, which have a direct correlation with the conflict for the US?
Uday, first and foremost, my best wishes of Janmashtami to you, my respected fellow panelists, and all the audience and viewers of NewsX. Let me put it this way: last 24 hours has been a reality check for Donald Trump that all these threats of sanctions, consequences do not necessarily always work, especially when it comes to Russia and other BRICS members. You see, I think this decision by Trump that he may not put that additional 25% tariff, it may not be linked to the entire conflict or reconciliation on that, but primarily because there is a considerable amount of heat in America as well, that suddenly for that 40-50 odd billion dollar that they import from India, on which this would have an impact, suddenly for them to find an alternate supply chain which is reliable will not be easy, and there will be impact on that. So I think he knows that things are heating up in America when it comes to the inflationary pressures. Secondly, if you look at the outcome of this meeting, well, the meeting actually showed that Putin knows how to deal with situations. There cannot be an instant ceasefire like instant noodle, because if you have an instant ceasefire, then Putin would say that soldiers would remain as they were and where they are stationed, which means there will be no exchange of lands. Secondly, I think Putin has been time and again saying about one thing, that you have to go back to the core issue. The core issue is the expansionist approach of NATO. The core issue is about arming of Ukraine, and the fact that NATO has been fighting this war by putting the gun on the shoulders of the Ukrainians. So Putin wants it very clear that you need to go to the core issue. Second, also important is this: there is a wedge today between the Western European countries and United States. There is an apprehension among the European countries that eventually the Americans and the Russians may have a deal on their own, completely bypassing the interest of European Union. And that is where I think Putin has been very successful in creating that void, creating that division. So I think today Trump realizes that all that pomp and show, showing those F-35 Joint Strike Fighters on both sides, that you have to intimidate Putin when he comes to Anchorage in Alaska, but the meeting is not going to work out. While going back, Putin said, let's have the next meeting in Moscow. I mean, I think Trump was completely taken by surprise. He wasn't expecting that. So if you have a series of dialogues with Russia and then Trump would have to go to Moscow, then it's almost like the entire isolationist approach that NATO had, EU had towards Putin is gone. See, I think Ukraine is still a small player in the whole scheme of things. Eventually, I do not think that Trump, if he forces a negotiation, it's going to work. I do not think the Russians would agree if they are not allowed to keep the land what they have. And I don't think any of the ceasefire will be accepted by the European Unions if their intents are not taken into account. So overall, having a cessation of conflict, having a peace deal will be desirable by all, but it may not happen so soon. That is a problem, that's a predicament. It's better Trump understands. But I think Trump got what he wanted in this thing. He wanted some footage. He wanted some publicity stunt. He was told by Putin that had he been the president in 2022, then the war would not have happened. This would be the headline, Uday, tomorrow in all the newspapers in United States. And Trump would say that, look, I was the one who imposed a tariff on India, and so Putin came for the meeting. So he looks for these short-term victories. It doesn't seem that he wants a long-term strategy he has in mind when it comes to ending the conflict. I believe Russia today is such a de-dollarized economy, it has so little dependence on the American exports, that all these threats of consequence, tariffs, sanctions are not going to impact them anymore. I mean, if you look at the present figures, India is right now importing 2 million barrels per day oil from Russia in spite of the threats of sanctions. And that 50% tariff, if it eventually comes, then it would help India to become far more resilient, because it's going to diversify the market towards another 40, 50 odd smaller countries. It may put effort, and the contingency funds have been kept in place to take care of the exporters in the short to medium term. But I think it is also a reality check for us that there is a price that you have to pay when it comes to United States as your strategic partner. It doesn't mean that you give away with all the relationship. That will remain, but you would have hiccups in between. That's why that 80-20 concept is important. Our entire focus of the economy, 80%, has to be on internal consumption. So the GST reduction that Prime Minister Modi mentioned about as a Diwali gift, national manufacturing mission that is coming up, all are aimed at reinvigorating, deepening the internal consumption architecture, so that your dependence on exports are limited around 20% of the GDP only, nothing more than that. So I think whatever has happened, if Trump was hoping that he would completely dismantle BRICS or weaken the BRICS members, it has not happened that way. And I think that is the outcome in the last 24 hours.
All right. Point taken. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this discussion. It's time for a short break.